Hello, BookTube. We're continuing my library tour of 2022, and we have reached the last bookshelf here in the little book room. We've been moving from east to west, all the way around the room, hundreds of books, and now we are finally on the last shelf of this classics bookcase, and then we'll be done with this room. Then I'm going to take a break from the library tour for just a bit in order to assess this room. But this last shelf is all classics. Paperback classics, usually of the old Bantam white-spined collection from years and years ago. A few of them are Signets and Mentors, but they're not anything that we haven't seen before. This room is heavy on the classics because they are my lifeblood when it comes to reading. So these aren't going to be anything you haven't seen. But this is the style that I mean, the ones that look like this. This is the House of Seven Gables with one light on there in the house. Then we have Return of the Native. See, this is the style that I would like all of these. I fell in love with them. I love the, okay, this is not one. This is a Bantam. This is the Nick Adams stories by Ernest Hemingway. But then I fell in love with these things, these Signet classic editions. Even though they aren't usually the best translations, often abridgments, I still love them anyway. And oftentimes I love the cover design as well. So, like for instance, this Return of the Native has a really good original art on the cover. That is really neat. Then we have, we'll go back to Bantam. This is Of Mice and Men, John Steinbeck, this classic old paperback. Then we have, just a long string of these Bantams. We have Wuthering Heights. Then The Complete Stories of Mark Twain. My favorite one of them all, there's no way to avoid it. My favorite one of all is the old Bantam classic of Moby Dick, which does not give us a whaling ship in action. It does not give us a chase boat being torn apart. It doesn't give us a breaching whale. It doesn't give us anything like that. Instead, it just gives us an ominous portrait of the sea. I bet this doesn't even tell me whose painting that is. It's possible that they did it for this edition, but even if they didn't, I don't think the old paperbacks don't feel so punctilious about crediting cover artwork or translators or anything like that. No, this doesn't say anything about it. But I love that for that cover for an edition of Moby Dick. Then we have Innocence Abroad by Mark Twain. See, we've seen a lot of these books before. I just have them in these editions as well. David Copperfield, Charles Dickens. They're not all together either. The authors aren't all together. Here we have Billy Budd and Other Stories, Herman Melville, so that should be with Moby Dick. Another great cover, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. This is, I don't think, the preferred translation, but I love this old paperback. Again, not the preferred translation. This is The Three Musketeers with the man with the glove there. That's a young cavalier on the cover. We have a couple of exceptions to the normal design rule. These two Mark Twains do not have white spines. This one is Huck Finn, and it has a blue spine because it reproduces the poster art for the Broadway show Big River, of which I was a big fan. So naturally, I wanted that as the cover of my paperback, Huck Finn. And then The Adventures of Tom Sawyer has a sort of a beige spine as well. Boys playing Crack the Whip there. Then we have Jude the Obscure and Far from the Madding Crowd. Here, I want to make sure these don't fall over. But just have standard English, English paintings on the cover there. We have Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson. And there are a bunch of others. There are a bunch of other Robert Louis Stevensons and a bunch of James Fenimore Cooper in these editions that I don't have at all. They'll turn up, but I don't have them, and I want them. Then Gulliver's Travels and Other Writings. So this has all of Gulliver's Travels plus a bunch of other stuff. We have a tiny little paperback of Voltaire. And again, with these old paperbacks, these were made for schools. These are not oftentimes the very best translations, the very best editions. I just like them. That's all. And so I like to accumulate them. I like to grab them when I find them. And it was Mark Richardson who finally just sat me down and told me, well, then you collect. Don't say that you don't collect. That's all that it is that you have a preference and you want to see them on your shelf. So likewise, we have Anna Karenina with a very sun-faded cover. This cover, I think, was originally very heavy in maroons and browns. And, of course, flesh tones on on the main character there. And I don't know who translates this. Joel Carmichael translates this. But I do not have the old Bantam classic for War and Peace. I will. Eventually, I will. Then The Sea Wolf by Jack London. Jack London is very, very much better known for Call of the Wild and White Fang, so that The Sea Wolf is somewhat overlooked by people who don't really study him. Then we have Henry David Thoreau. This is Walden and Other Writings. Lovely picture there. That is the actual location. We have Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Lovely old Victorian painting there. Just a tiny little thing. I'm very happy that this was not included with a bunch of other stuff. It just sits on its own. Then we have an old Signet classic of The Idylls of the King, which has had prettier editions and better editions, but I fell in love with this a long, long time ago, and used this paperback quite extensively in teaching. Then we have Jane Austen, but only one Jane Austen. I don't have any others. I'm sure that I will find them. This is an old Signet classic of Northanger Abbey. But I don't have any, as far as I know, I don't have any of the old Bantam classics of Jane Austen at all. Not even Pride and Prejudice, which is the only edition of Pride and Prejudice I don't have. Nicholas Nickleby. Beautiful as the day it was made. Okay, then we have another Jack London. This is Call of the Wild and White Fang. Those are typically put together. Needless to say, they aren't my favorite Jack London, even though they're overwhelmingly popular, because there aren't many humans who can write authoritatively about what dogs experience. In fact, there's only one. Jack London wasn't him. Then we have The Hunchback of Notre Dame, a recent edition here, a beige cover there. This is not only, if I remember correctly, a somewhat histrionic translation, but also an abridgment. So again, these aren't the only copies that you want of these, but as you've seen from this library tour, they aren't my only copies of most of these things. Then we have an old Mentor paperback. This is, in fact, a great translation. This is Horace Gregory's translation of my favorite book, Ovid's Metamorphoses. I like Horace Gregory's translation better than any that has been done before or since. And that does violence to a few old friends of mine. But nevertheless, I call them like I see them. Then we have yet another Beowulf. This is many, many Beowulfs that we've seen here on this show. This is the famous Burton Raffle translation. And I have it, but I wanted this Mentor white spine mass market paperback because this paperback sold truckloads of copies, more than you would ever expect. If you're a scholar, an academic, and you do a translation of Beowulf, and suddenly you can afford 2 homes and to put your great-grandchildren through Ivy League colleges because of that book, I wanted the version that did that, so I waited until I found it. And then finally, a big fat book by Theodore Dreiser, who scarcely ever wrote any other kind of book. This is An American Tragedy with this rather nice cover there. It's not an old Bantam. I think Bantam did all of Dreiser, but I don't have any of it. I was just reading about this the other day. Yesterday, in fact. The other day I got a big collection called Books of the Century, which takes a sweeping 1,000-page chronological look at the book reviews in the New York Times, from the earliest days when they were short and unsigned to later and later when they got longer and longer as the book section and then the independent pull-away book review section got more and more popular and grew in authority, so that all of a sudden, if you were a writer or a publisher, you wanted a New York Times review. That had not been thought of in America before then, except for things like, the Saturday Review or maybe the Atlantic. But I was reading that anthology is fantastic. Every time I encounter it and reread it, I realize how much better it is than what I thought it was. And there's a review in there of this book, of An American Tragedy, when it was new. And the reviewer makes a whole bunch of great points, both positive and negative. That's the thing. That's the joy of reading that kind of a book, is that there'll be negative reviews or negative parts of positive reviews about these canonical classics. No one would think to do it now. Or rather, the 20th century would do it just stupidly based on bigot characteristics. I'm going to dismiss The Hunchback of Notre Dame because it's cultural appropriation to translate a work out of its original language, and the author was a heterosexual man with white skin. So, of course, it's a piece of junk, because your kind need not apply here. In the 21st century, that's done all the time. All of these books are dismissed. But in the 20th century, no. Once these things entered the canon, started being taught in academia, then there was no chance. If somebody reprinted, what's a good example? Well, if there was a new translation of Anna Karenina, lots and lots of people would talk about the book, and lots and lots of people would talk about the new translation, but no one would talk about whether or not the book has any flaws. No one would do that. And that squeal of pain you heard was David Murphy. Flaws? His beloved Anna? No. But when you've got people reviewing Custom of the Country, when it's a new book, they have no idea it's going to last 100 years, then they'll be assessing it, as book reviewers should do. And that's tremendously refreshing. And I forget the name of the reviewer, somewhat ironically. I forget the name of the reviewer, but the reviewer had all sorts of good and bad things to say about An American Tragedy, starting with the fact that I think is indisputable, which is that the book is 3 times too long. Who would say that now? Anyway, that is this shelf. All of these paperback classics. And the one thing you couldn't see because of where the camera is set up is that was the whole shelf. I've been gradually shifting these as I find more, and there is no room here anymore. So now what I'm going to do, the last few of these old Bantam classics that I found, I showed you them on camera, and I said, well, I'll have to move some things around on the one shelf where they're accumulating. But now that shelf is completely full, almost completely full. We had some Bantams, right? And we had some Signets and a couple of Mentors. Okay, so if I were to preemptively do that, we had some Signets. You've got all these Bantams, more and more Bantams. Okay, great. All right, but then there's a Signet at the very end. The Mark Twain is a Signet. Okay. So right now on this shelf, there are 4 books that are not old Bantam classics. There are only 4 of them. So I have room for 4 more old Bantam classics. And then I've got to rearrange everything. But I'm going to rearrange everything anyway. So we're going to say goodbye to the library tour as it stands now for a little bit of time. But I will resume. This is a 2022 project, and 2022 is still young. So I will wrap this up for now, and I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.